Chapter 39, Graduation. Lillian Fonzatelli called Miss Pringle in her best black dress. Miss Pringle always read out the names at graduation. It was a tradition. Arthur Samuel Forbes called Miss Pringle. The ceremony at Carleton High was formal, with the boys in suits and ties and the girls in white dresses or gowns, all seated in the gymnasium in more or less alphabetical order. The gymnasium was decorated with flowers and banners. Parents and other relatives sat up in the balcony. The grads sat in the auditorium, girls on one side, boys on the other, rising and walking forward to stage as their names were called. Mike sat in his wheelchair, not ready to show off his new legs. Then Sarah was there, suddenly standing beside him in a white gown that contrasted with her shining dark hair. She looked lovely. He looked up at her, and she smiled and placed a hand on his shoulder, and he understood what she had meant about his day being graduation for her too. He waited for his name to come up, excited, thinking not of himself, but of Sarah when she was a kid, how he'd almost run over her feet with his wheelchair for the first time. And now she was grown up too, no longer a little kid. Sarah Stephanie Francis. She had never mentioned that middle name, the one on her grave. There was still so much he didn't know about her, had never heard her play the piano, had never... Robert Brent Paladin called Miss Pringle. Mike tore his eyes away from Sarah as Robbie bounced up onto the stage for his diploma and handshake, self-conscious in his new suit. Then he thumped back down the stairs, his face creased in a huge smile, brandishing his dogwood British Columbia's flower symbol certificate like a sword. Soon it was Mike's turn. Michael Scott called Miss Pringle. He didn't want to leave her, but he had to go. Wait for me, Sarah. They had provided a ramp for him. He wheeled on the stage and received his dogwood. As he shook hands with the principal, he could see his aunt up in the balcony, waving her program wildly. He searched frantically for Sarah. There she was, smiling up at him. He grinned and shot back down the ramp, showing off his wheelchair skills, back to his spot in the aisle near Robbie. But Sarah had gone. When the valedictory address was done, and the band and the choir had performed their final number, when the ceremony was over, everyone crowded out of the gym and along the hallway to the cafeteria for pop and pastries. Mike searched amid the confusion of formal dresses and gowns for a sight of Sarah. Boys and girls chattered to each other. He finally made it to the crowded cafeteria where Norma was waiting for him, her eyes bright with tears. She bent and kissed him and hugged his embarrassed face to her plump chest. When she released him, she said, "I owe you a lot, Norma. I don't know what I would have." "Ah, hush," said Norma. "You're more of a son than a nephew, Mike. You know that. I'm owed nothing." He looked around for Sarah, but she was not there. Chapter 40, Fast Like a Fist. He had a job at the Center for July, talking with recently handicapped kids whose dives into rivers had fractured spinal vertebrae, or kids like himself who survived vehicle accidents. He enjoyed the work. By the end of the first week, the counselors were saying that his cheerful, positive attitude was powerful medicine, just what the kids needed as they tried to make difficult adjustments. The pay wasn't much, but it made him feel useful, and it would help Norma pay their bills. At rehab, he walked on his new legs as much as possible. When he became too tired, he had used his trusty old wheelchair, which now had rear racks for his legs. Robbie went to work in a furniture warehouse, and he was talking about staying on after the summer if a permanent job came up. Government exam results came through. Mike and Robbie had passed everything. Robbie was so surprised and happy that he bought a bottle of British Columbia's best champagne around to Mike's to go with Norma's cheesecake. "I'm so proud of you both," said Norma, raising her glass. Dolly Dollywall came over for a visit with her husband and two boys and a plate of sticky cakes. The boys were twins. One was called Arshad, the other Varan. Mike couldn't tell them apart. They sat silently together on Norma's left seat and ate pastries. When everyone had gone, Mike went to his room and examined his yearbook's gold cover and inscription. Carleton High School, 1999 to 2000. Inside was Carleton's first 50 years with an archival photographs, text by Michael Scott, and a watercolor painting of a boy named Charlie Johnson painted by SF. He turned to his favorite page, the one amid the pages of 2000 grads, with its elementary school black and white picture, clipped from the Clarion and pasted in by Mike, of Sarah Stephanie Francis, the girl whose graduation came 18 years late. He didn't expect to see her again. He didn't know why, except there had been something final in the way that she'd looked at his graduation, and the way that she'd looked at him. He could practically swear that the shine in her eyes had been tears. What had she said on the seawall? It was a graduation for her too? Then she had gone. It was all over. Dorfman's criminal trial would be coming up in October, and it would be all over for sure. He felt once more that crushing sense of loss, that emptiness in his life which couldn't be filled. But he had to try anyway, concentrating on work in the center, concentrating on walking practice, keeping himself busy, keeping himself useful. At the end of the third week, he was so tired he had hardly enough energy to swing himself up out of his chair and onto his bed. Norma wasn't home yet. He closed his eyes. Sounds of her radio drifted into his open door. He should have switched it off. He made a move towards the door, but then stopped listening. Air France Concorde crashed, only for a minute, taking off from Paris. Bound for New York. German passengers. Everyone killed. Total of 113 people. He strained to hear more, but the news item was finished. A supersonic Concorde. The Concorde was beautiful. They never crashed. Everyone knew that. The deaths, 113. People in suits and dresses and stockings and shoes with rings and handbags and laptops and wristwatches all killed. What had they been thinking about as the plane was taking off? What were they looking forward to seeing Manhattan from the top of the World Trade Center or the Empire State Building? Or were they thinking of stocks and bonds and planning for their old age pensions and many years into the future, not knowing that they would be dead in less than 1 minute? Death coming in fast like a fist. He closed his eyes again, hearing the buzz of the radio, seeing Becky and his parents, and Sarah. Soon he was asleep, flying in the clouds, his hands on the controls of his Spitfire, the confident scream of the plane's Merlin engine in his ears, the smell of leather and oil in his nostrils, the sight of the brilliant high blue as he burst up out of the clouds and towards the sun. Chapter 41. Leave Me Alone. David Barnwell was new at the center. He had lost a leg, amputated below the knee in a motorcycle accident. He was 16 years old. David reminded Mike of himself, how he used to be when he was first sent to the center. David yelled at everyone, refused to practice with the crutches, refused to eat, messed his bed, wouldn't even look at the temporary wheelchair they were trying to get him to use. His parents visited, trying their best to reason with him, but he stared ahead, arms folded, saying nothing, waiting for them to go and leave him alone. His chart was marked, difficult. "Welcome to Heartbreak Hotel," Mike said as he wheeled into the room at their first meeting. There was no response. Mike tried to talk with the boy, but David was having none of it. He covered his head with a blanket, refusing to listen. "Leave him," the nurses advised. "Try again in a day or two." But David's behavior didn't improve. A week went by, and then another. Finally, Mike talked to the boy through his protective blanket. "You can't cover yourself up forever, David." "Drop dead," came the muffled reply. "I used to be like you, David, in this place. Mad at everyone. Mad at the world. I think I can help, but you've got to let me try." "Leave me alone. David? Drop dead. You've got to talk to me." "Talk to the well-behaved crippled robot in the wheelchair," he yelled from under his blanket. "So I can be a good little crippled robot too, like you, and have all these stupid fat Popeye jerks who call themselves doctors and nurses pat me on the head for being a good boy and doing as I'm told? You gotta be kidding me." "Wheelchair? What wheelchair?" The covers moved. David peeped out, scowling. Blue eyes clouded with grief, brown hair long and wild. Mind your own stupid business and leave me a... He stared at Mike standing beside his bed, without aid, hands on his hips. Mike's disbelieving eyes moved down to Mike's new legs. Mike walked under the bed, closer to the bed. He said, I used to be a runner. I was on the track team. But that was then and this is now. I got over it. How do you like my new tin legs? Pretty good, huh? David's mouth hung open. He was speechless. You've still got one good leg left, and most of your other leg. You're lucky. You can walk with the help of crutches, then later with a tin leg like mine. It's called prosthesis. You won't have to push a wheelchair around and look up to everyone like a 6-year-old kid the rest of your life. You'll be able to walk again, run, ski even. You hear what I'm saying? The boy looked at him for the longest time, and then he said, What did you say your name was? Mike. I'll be able to ski? I don't see why not. Or snowboard. Whatever. David stared at him. Mike said, I gotta go. You want to pass me some juice? He pointed to the table at the end of the bed. Mike moved a few steps and passed the juice. You coming tomorrow? You going to start listening to the nurses? They can all drop dead. Mike turned and walked towards the door. Mike? He stopped and turned. I'll think about it. Mike left, grinning to himself. As the weeks went by, the need for his services at the center increased substantially. He was now a permanent member of the team. He had a proper job and a title, youth director. His small salary increased as he learned to take on extra responsibilities. The effect on his patients was therapeutic. He chatted with accident victims in their rooms, helping to ease them out of depression, boosting their morale, providing comfort. He brought them books from the center's library, and he wrote letters or filled out forms that they were unable to do for themselves. He and Norma drove to his family's graves at the forest lawn a couple of times a month, and every week he drove himself and Chris's car to Sarah's grave to tidy and leave flowers. He always left a message under the glass jar for her to read. Norma was delighted with the change in him. It's wonderful to see you fit and happy, Mike. Joanne would be so proud of you, and your father too.
Please call 1731.
He made himself believe it that his father would be proud of him. He was able to walk long stretches of the seawall and continued his outings with Robbie to Granville Island or to the Maritime Museum whenever they could get together. They pushed the empty wheelchair, though Mike was depending on it less and less as his skill and stamina increased. Robbie, for his part, was not only slimmer and gaining extra muscle from his arms and shoulders, but he also had more confidence in himself. The warehouse was only the beginning, he explained to Mike. He was learning the furniture business from the bottom up. He aimed to get into the import end of the industry and maybe start his own business someday. Robbie really would start his own business someday. Mike believed that. When he set his mind on something, he always followed through. You'll be famous, Robbie, said Mike. I can see it now. Robbie Paladin, well-known tycoon and billionaire, renowned film producer, creator of Casablanca 2 and other fine movies. Now there's an idea, Robbie said, grinning.
Where is Shudak? Please